Welcome to Crime Files, TikTok compilations, where reality is darker than fiction and the footage never lies. This is not a place for the faint of heart. Here, you won't find scripted thrillers or polished dramas. You'll find the raw, unfiltered truth, chilling clips, disturbing case files, and real-life moments that expose the depths of human darkness. What you're about to experience isn't entertainment. It's reality at its most brutal.
I was completely traumatized when I watched this disturbing opening scene of Jeepers Creepers. But did you know that the inspiration for this scene came from a real true crime case? And it's one that will send chills down your spine. I mean, just imagine driving down a remote back road, just on a joyride with your partner when you drive past an abandoned school. When you look closer, there's a man carrying a bloody sheet and dropping it into a hole at this old school. You keep driving, but then a little ways down the road, you notice the same man in a blood-covered vehicle following you down the road, almost like he's trying to run you off of it. You later find out that this man is responsible for brutally murdering his wife, and now he's on the run. Jeepers Creepers is hands down one of the scariest movies to me, but I can't stop thinking about the real story that inspired it. So let's talk about it. Everyone who knew Dennis and Marilyn Depew and their 3 kids described them as a loving and happy family. But behind closed doors, Dennis lived a completely different life. Dennis was a 46-year-old property assessor, and he was married to Marilyn, a 48-year-old high school guidance counselor. They had 3 kids together and lived in the small town of Coldwater, Michigan. They were married for 18 years by the time 1989 rolled around, and as the years went on, tensions grew. Marilyn said that Dennis was really controlling and he became more and more withdrawn. She would secretly tell her friends that she was just really unhappy and wanted a divorce. So in December of 1989, she finally filed for one. Marilyn told her attorney that Dennis was trying to ruin her life, and he wouldn't let her make any of her own decisions. Dennis really didn't want to separate, and he felt like Marilyn was turning their kids against him. But once the divorce was finalized, things started to escalate. Dennis was granted bi-weekly visitations with his kids, but they really didn't want to spend any time with him. During this time, Marilyn was nice enough to grant him access to their guest house for him to use as an office, but really Dennis used it as a way to further control his family. Dennis became more and more aggressive to the point that Marilyn feared for her and her kids' lives, so she changed all the locks on the doors hoping that it would keep him out, but it didn't. He would still find ways to get inside. This brings us to Easter Sunday 1990. It was Dennis's year for holidays, so he went over to the house to pick up the kids, but none of them wanted to go with him. Marilyn tried talking to him, but at this point he became so angry with her and started yelling at her. The kids watched as he pushed her down the stairs, and once she was at the bottom, he began beating her to the point of seriously injuring her. They begged for him to stop, but he wouldn't, so their oldest daughter ran to the neighbor's house to call the police. Dennis then told his other 2 kids that he was going to take Marilyn to the hospital, so he put her in his van and drove off. But they never made it to any hospital, and not long after this, the 2 vanished. A massive search began, but no one knew where to start, and this is where the story takes a really dark, disturbing turn. As this was all unfolding, an older couple decided they wanted to go for a joyride and spend this nice Easter Sunday out on the open road. They slowly drove down Snow Perry Road near Coldwater, and back then this was a really remote road that no one was ever on. As they were driving, a van with a license plate number starting with GZ sped past them. It scared them with how fast he was going, but they didn't really think much of it. That is until a few minutes later. This is when they drove past an abandoned school, and when they looked closer, they saw the van that sped past them parked there. Then, to their horror, they saw the driver of this van, which was a tall man wearing a white hat carrying a bloody sheet. He was trying to dispose of it, thinking no one was around to watch. The couple quickly drove away because they had such a bad feeling about what they just saw. But just a few minutes later, they looked up into the rearview mirror and saw the same van driven by the creepy man right behind them. The van tailgated them for several miles as if trying to run them off the road until the couple pulled over. This is when they noticed that the van had pulled over at a remote rest stop, and wanting to know what was going on, the couple turned around and drove closer. There they saw the man changing the license plate on the van, but even more disturbing is that the entire passenger side of the van and even the inside was covered in blood. The couple wanted to call the police right then and there, but they wanted more information, so they decided to go back to the abandoned school to look around. This is when they found the bloody sheet that the man was carrying sticking out of a hole, and this is when they finally called the police. They told them everything, and this is when they were informed that the man they saw was Dennis Depew, and he was wanted for seriously injuring and possibly even killing his wife. When police arrived at the school, they found tire tracks that matched Dennis's van. They also determined that the blood found on the sheet belonged to Marilyn, and there was so much blood and other evidence that it seemed clear that she was dead at this point, and that Dennis had killed her. This suspicion was sadly confirmed the next day when Marilyn's body was found on a desolate road not far from the school. Along with being severely beaten, she'd also been been shot once in the back of the head. Over the next few days, Dennis would send a series of 17 letters to his friends and family, just like this one, where he tried to justify Marilyn's death. They were postmarked all over the place, which made it difficult to locate him. After this, Dennis vanished, and no one knew what really happened to him. That is, until 1 year later. It's now March of 1991 in Dallas, Texas. A woman named Mary got off work and went back to her house, where she was surprised to see her boyfriend's van in the driveway. She was dating a man named Hank Queen, and usually Hank would park his van in the garage, so this was weird to her. When she went into her house, Hank told her that his mom was really sick and he needed to make an emergency trip back to his hometown. So he asked her to hurry up and go in the kitchen to make him some food for the road. Mary felt like something really weird was going on, but she did as he asked and went to make him some food. As she did this, he packed up all of his personal belongings, and he kept telling her to either remake his food or add stuff to it. He finally said goodbye and took off. Later that night, Mary was watching TV when a new segment on Unsolved Mysteries came on, and she was shocked to see Hank's picture plastered on the screen, except it wasn't Hank. In all reality, it was Dennis, who gave her a completely fake name, and there she learned that he was wanted for murdering his ex-wife in Michigan. She believes that he was acting so weird earlier because he saw his own broadcast on TV, and he kept her in the kitchen so she wouldn't see it too. What's crazy is that she had this gut feeling in the past, well before she found all of this out, that Dennis was off, and she even hired a PI to look into him, but they found nothing under the name Hank Queen. So all of this was reported to police, and Mary gave them his new Texas license plate number. He was quickly tracked down in Louisiana, and within 4 hours, he would be dead. State troopers tried pulling him over, but he led them on a 15-mile high-speed chase, which ended in police shooting out his back tires. At 4 a.m., and after shooting at police, he turned the gun on himself and ended his own life. It's crazy to me that he was able to evade police for an entire year, essentially just starting a new life. And this case definitely left a horrifying mark, because it eventually inspired the opening scene of Jeepers Creepers. This movie follows a brother and sister who happen to encounter a monster while on a road trip home from college. They accidentally drive by this creature throwing what appears to be a body wrapped in a bloody sheet down a pipe outside of an abandoned church. They then discover a horrifying scene after going down the pipe to investigate, and then they are almost run off the road by said creature as they try to leave the scene. This is one of the first horror movies I ever watched as a kid, and the ending scene is still burned into my brain, which, if you know, you know. But the fact that this is based off of a real encounter is absolutely terrifying, and now you'll never catch me taking a back road like this.
Let's talk more about some of the 48 women that are on death row in the United States and what exactly they did to get there. Starting with 52-year-old Lisa Chamberlain, who has been on death row in Mississippi for the last 19 years, and she is currently the only woman on death row in Mississippi. She was sentenced to death for the brutal 2004 murders of 38-year-old Linda Heinzelman and 34-year-old Vernon Hollett, where her and her boyfriend both dismembered their bodies and tried to hide them in a freezer. At the end of February 2004, Lisa and her boyfriend, Roger Gillett, drove from Kansas to Mississippi, where Roger's cousin Vernon lived with his girlfriend Linda. They stayed at their house for a few weeks until March 20th of 2004, when Vernon and Linda went missing. According to Lisa, on that day on March 20th, Linda and Vernon asked for Roger and Lisa to leave and find somewhere else to stay, but Roger refused to leave. Instead, he decided that since they weren't going to let them stay with them, he was just going to rob and kill them. After an argument between all of them, Roger pulled a gun on Vernon and Linda and demanded that they open up their safe. He tried doing several different things to scare them into opening their safe. At first, he began to beat them, and then he even took it a step further and assaulted Linda, but even after all of this, they still refused to open the safe. Eventually, after several hours of trying to get them to open the safe, Lisa grew impatient and suggested they just kill them, so they very brutally killed both of them. After killing them, they dismembered both of their bodies, put them into a freezer, and taped the freezer shut. They then drove this freezer over to Kansas, where Roger's family farm was, and they plugged it in there, hoping that no one would ever find it. Over a week later, on March 29th, police were actually alerted by Roger's family member after they told them that Roger had stolen a car and parked it on the property, and they also believed that he was manufacturing drugs out of the farm. Police were eventually able to obtain a search warrant for the property, and this is where they found that Linda's truck was parked outside of a shed on the property, and inside of that shed was Linda and Vernon's bodies inside of the freezer. After this, Lisa and Roger were immediately arrested and charged with their murders. Both of them went to trial separately, and in both trials, the juries found them guilty of Vernon and Linda's murder Roger, and they were both sentenced to death. Back in 2018, Roger's sentence was actually overturned by the Supreme Court, and he was granted a resentencing, so he was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lisa remains on death row in Mississippi, where she has been for the last 19 years, and as of right now, she does not have an execution date scheduled. Next up is 62-year-old Carlette Parker, who has been on death row in North Carolina for the last 26 years. She was sentenced to death for the 1998 kidnapping and murder of an elderly woman, 86-year-old Alice Covington. Back in May of 1998, Carlette was working as a home healthcare worker for an elderly man at a retirement village in North Carolina. Also living in this retirement village and a close friend of the man that she was working for was 86-year-old Alice Covington. On the morning of May 12th of 1998, Alice ran into Carlette in the parking lot of a Kroger, and some people reported actually seeing them both fighting and struggling with each other. A few hours later, Carlette was driving Alice's car with Alice in the passenger seat, and she went to Alice's bank and withdrew $2,500 from her bank account. She was able to do this because she went to a drive-through bank, and the teller actually saw Alice sleeping in the passenger seat, so she assumed that Carlette was helping her. Carlette then drove Alice over to her trailer, where she eventually drowned her in her bathtub. After killing her, she undressed Alice, washed her clothes, put her clothes back on her body, and then put her back into the car. She then just left Alice inside of the car and left to a family party for several hours. The next morning, she drove Alice's car around for several hours before eventually parking on a dirt road. She then placed Alice's body back in the driver's seat and then just hitchhiked back home. Alice's body was found 2 days later on May 14th, and when they found her, she had bruises across her face, neck, hands, upper part of both arms, upper left back and shoulder, and her left wrist, and she also had lacerations on her wrist and lower leg. It was also confirmed that her clothing was stained with pepper spray, and there was also evidence that she had possibly been tased. Since several people actually witnessed Carlette and Alice outside of the Kroger parking lot fighting with each other, she was immediately brought in for questioning when Alice's body was found. After several days of questioning, she eventually confessed to kidnapping, robbing, and drowning Alice. Carlette went to trial in 1999, and during this trial, it was also discovered that 3 years before the murder in 1995, she pled guilty to 16 counts of obtaining property by false pretenses after she stole $44,000 from one of her elderly patients. So this woman is just a monster. The jury at her trial deliberated for just 2 hours before they found her guilty of Alice's murder, and she was sentenced to death. Carlette remains on death row in North Carolina, where she has been for the last 26 years, and as of right now, she does not have an execution date scheduled. The last person I want to talk about today is 53-year-old Tacy Vixen, who has been on death row in Ohio for the last 30 years. She was sentenced to death for the 1993 murder of 22-year-old Christopher Hammer, who she buried alive, and unfortunately, I cannot find a picture of Christopher Hammer anywhere. Really quickly before I move forward, I do want to clarify that Tacy is a transgender woman who transitioned while she was on death row. I told you guys that I would be covering all 48 women that are on death row, and she is on the list, so that's what I'm doing. Like I said before, you do not have to respect this person, you do not have to like this person, but you also do not have to disrespect an entire community just because one person is evil. And I also want to clarify that if you do try to look this case up, all of the court documents are under the name Timothy Hoffner. On September 22nd of 1993, Tacy and a man named Archie Dixon went to a home where Christopher Hammer was staying, and they went to this home with the intention of killing Christopher and stealing his car. When they arrived, they brutally attacked Christopher. They beat him, they robbed him, and then they tied him to a bed before they eventually drove him over to a secluded area in the woods. Once they arrived, they dug a shallow grave, and then they tied Christopher's hands and feet behind his back, they gagged him, and then they dropped him into this grave. They started to fill the hole with dirt, and at some point Christopher was able to get the gag out of his mouth and pull one of his feet free. Tacy jumped in and held his mouth shut so that he couldn't scream for help, and then she held him in the hole while Archie kept throwing dirt on top of him. They kept filling the hole until eventually Christopher was unable to move anymore, and then once they filled the hole all the way up, they walked all over the top of it to compact it, and then they just drove away and left. After killing him, Archie actually stole Christopher's identity by taking his social security security number and his birth certificate and getting a brand new ID with his picture. He then was able to use this ID to obtain a title to Christopher's car, and then after he did this, he sold Christopher's car to a dealer for $2,800. Over a month later, on November 8th, police were investigating Christopher's disappearance when they discovered that Archie was the one who stole his identity and sold his car. Archie was obviously quickly arrested and eventually ended up confessing to everything, also implicating Tacy in the murder. Archie and Tacy both went to trial where they were both found guilty of Christopher's murder and they were both sentenced to death. Archie Dixon is still currently on death row. Tacy was actually scheduled to be executed just last year, but this was delayed due to a lack of access to the preferred drugs. So as of right now, she does have an execution date scheduled for July 14th of 2027.
What you just watched isn't fiction. It's a chilling glimpse into the dark side of reality. If these stories shook you, don't stay silent. Subscribe to join a community that remembers. Like to keep these cases alive. Share to spread awareness. And comment your thoughts. Who do you think was really behind it? Or which moment hit you the hardest? Let's uncover the truth together.